What if the intense political conflict you see all around you today isn't really about policy? I mean, not about taxes or healthcare or infrastructure, but about something far more personal, something primal: identity.
That is the core question, and it's a terrifyingly simple one that drives the work we're looking at today. It really challenges this old assumption that political fights are just, intellectual debates over details.
Absolutely. And today we're doing an essential deep dive into political scientist Lilliana Mason's incredible book, Uncivil Agreement: How Politics Became Our Identity. We usually give you a really focused analysis, but this research, well, it demanded a wider lens. So today we're trying something new. Discover a new in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary. Unlike our previous review, which offers a focused analysis, this feature delivers a comprehensive overview tracing the intellectual roots, key arguments, and real-world impact of this subject. If you appreciate this expanded format and find it helpful, let us know. Your feedback will help shape future content.
And Mason's central thesis is that modern American political conflict is driven less by what we disagree on policy-wise and much more by our partisan identities, and specifically how those identities, they fused with our other deep social identities.
You mean things like race, religion, where we live?
Exactly. Race, religion, geography, even lifestyle. It all starts to stack up under a single political banner.
And that stacking up is what she calls the mega-identity, right?
Yeah.
Where all these different social divisions line up perfectly with the political one.
Precisely. This fusion creates these groups that aren't just politically opposed, they're socially and ideologically uniform. So if you've ever felt like policy debates are impossible because no one is listening to the facts, Mason basically confirms that feeling. They aren't listening because you aren't debating a policy, you're debating their group identity.
And before we get into the details of how this all works, just a quick note for you. We're your expert guides, and you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
Our mission today is to trace Mason's argument and explain how this shift from policy conflict to identity conflict causes us to prioritize our side winning over literally anything else. Over compromise, over good policy, it fundamentally changes the whole game of democracy.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where do we start? We should probably establish the intellectual foundations. Mason's book is a work of political science, but it expertly blends quantitative research with some really core insights from social psychology.
Right, and to understand why partisanship feels so personal, she has to ground it in that social psychology first. She needs to show that political tribalism isn't just about what you believe politically, it's about this deep primal sense of group membership. And she heavily references the Robbers Cave experiment.
Oh, that's the famous summer camp study, right? Where they took a bunch of perfectly normal boys who didn't know each other.
Yep, and they arbitrarily divided them into two groups, the Eagles and the Rattlers.
And then just made them compete.
Exactly. They had them compete for prizes, and the stunning part was how quickly that arbitrary division created extreme hostility. I mean, within days, these boys were calling the other group names, vandalizing their cabins. They refused to even associate with them, even though they were basically identical a week before.
Just the act of belonging to a group, of having an identity, was enough to spark conflict.
That was it. The mere fact of having an us and a them generated instant bias and loyalty. That sets the stage perfectly. It proves this group affiliation thing is primal, it's instinctive.
And that's Mason's big move. She applies that same principle to American politics. So this part of the book establishes that being a Democrat or a Republican isn't just a label. It's a deeply ingrained group membership that triggers all those same biases.
It explains why opposing the other side can feel so instinctual. It's not always a rational choice.
So, if the foundation is that we are naturally prone to tribalism, the next big question is, how did American politics sort itself into these two perfect tribes? This is where she gets into the history, the process she calls sorting.
The sorting process is the key mechanism. It explains how the messy, complex political landscape of, say, the mid-20th century became today's tidy, monolithic camps. The Democratic and Republican parties used to be what she calls heterogeneous coalitions.
Meaning they were full of contradictions, just messy.
Totally messy. A party could have a pro-union Catholic from New York and a fiscally conservative business owner from rural Indiana under the same banner. The divisions were cross-cutting.
Right, so you might agree with your party on economics, but disagree on social issues. Your party label didn't define your entire social life.
But the book details how that changed dramatically. We saw the collapse of these cross-cutting alignments. A lot of it was driven by shifts on race. The civil rights realignment's a huge one. But also this gradual sorting based on religion, union status, and geography.
As the parties took clear stands, people who shared social identities started migrating to the same political party.
Yep. The classic examples are white Southerners moving out of the Democratic Party and very religious voters aligning more and more with the Republican Party. Suddenly, your party label is tightly connected to your whole social life, who you go to church with, where you live, your social class.
And that leads to a key turning point, the rise of ideologically consistent parties. Now, if you're conservative on the economy, you're almost certainly conservative on cultural issues too, and vice versa.
And that consistency makes it incredibly easy to see politics not as a complex negotiation, but as a clash between two coherent, totally opposing worldviews. It simplifies everything down to which group you belong to.
And that simplification is the birth of the mega-identity.
That's it. Partisanship stops being just about voting. It becomes this powerful social identity, like an ethnic or religious identity, and it exudes this powerful emotional influence on all of your attitudes.
And this is where Mason brings in the hard data to prove how personal it's become. She introduces survey evidence around this idea of effective polarization.
Effective polarization is really just the emotional side of the split. It's the metric that shows people feeling increasing warmth toward their own party and, at the same time, increasing coldness, distrust, and active dislike toward the other party.
And this isn't just intellectual disagreement. She's talking about a deep emotional rift.
Oh, absolutely. It even includes a measurable rise in openly expressed dislike and, in some cases, the dehumanization of political opponents.
And this is so important for you, the listener, to grasp, because the conflict becomes emotional. It's driven by negative feelings. Mason talks about how anger and fear toward the out party become these really powerful motivators.
They are powerful motivators. Those negative feelings drive engagement within each camp. If you believe the other side isn't just wrong, but is a fundamental threat to your way of life, which the mega-identity suggests, then you are motivated to show up, but only to defeat the enemy, not to find common ground.
This leads to one of her most crucial findings, the one that really separates policy from identity. She presents data suggesting people support or oppose policies less because of their actual content.
And more because of which party is seen as owning that position.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think of it like this. Mason found that if you take a nonpartisan bill, maybe a climate regulation or a corporate tax cut, and you just switch the party label on it, support from the opposing party plummets. Even if the actual policy, the text of the bill, is identical, that's a clear sign that the identity is driving the reaction, not a detailed judgment of the policy itself.
That kind of deep, reflective exploration of books is so compelling. And before we get into the behavioral consequences, we want to let you know that you are listening to an in-depth book analysis. For more reflective exploration of books like this, we highlight Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques inspiring reflection and rational thought, and he is valuable for aspiring authors.
And that discussion of mega-identities leads right into the real-world behavioral consequences. This doesn't just stay in survey data. It fundamentally changes how democracy works on the ground.
Okay, so what are those specific, observable behavioral changes that Mason traces? How does this identity war actually show up in the voting booth?
It shows up primarily in the explosion of straight ticket voting. As your partisan identity fuses with your other social identities, you become consistently partisan all the way down the ballot. Mason argues that once your party represents your full sense of self, your region, your religion, your race splitting a ticket feels less like a nuanced choice and more like a social betrayal.
A betrayal of your entire identity.
Exactly. And that makes the stakes of every single election feel dramatically higher. The book observes that people are more and more inclined to treat elections as zero-sum contests between hostile groups, not debates over policy. The goal isn't better governance, it's group survival.
So the other side isn't just a political opponent, they're an existential threat.
That's the feeling, yes. To illustrate this, the book uses these collective characters. You have the American mass public, defined by this in-party, out-party psychology. Then, the political parties themselves act as these vessels, these containers for the mega-identities.
And then there are the elite actors, the candidates, the party strategists. They play a huge role in all this.
A critical role. For example, the 2016 Donald Trump campaign is referenced by Mason, not as a political critique, but as a perfect illustration of rhetoric that explicitly taps into these identity-based resentments. It activates that strong us versus them framing, using elite cues to reinforce those mega-identities in the public.
And this division is physically reinforced, too. I think she talks about geographic sorting.
Yes, you can't ignore that. The book cites related research showing that people are increasingly choosing to live among like-minded neighbors.
So we literally sort ourselves into these homogenous communities.
We do. Our neighborhoods, our churches, our social networks,
Mhm.
they all start to become politically and socially uniform. And when you never interact with the out party in your daily life, it's so much easier to see them as distant, different, and, yeah, potentially threatening.
That lack of exposure just reinforces the whole negative feedback loop.
And this accumulation of personalized conflict, eventually it starts to erode the shared structures of our government. The book shifts toward how this identity-based polarization shapes our views of democratic norms and what tactics are acceptable.
Which is the ultimate and most sobering part of the analysis.
It is, because if winning for your group is the only thing that matters, then the rules, the procedures, the institutional norms, they all become secondary. Mason even uses examples from other societies where this kind of unchecked group-based conflict led to severe democracy-eroding consequences.
And the purpose there is to underscore the risks, right? The risks of prioritizing symbolic victory over shared rules and mutual restraint.
Precisely. When identity trumps a procedure, the very foundation of democratic competition shifts from being about policy to being about raw power.
The real utility of Mason's Uncivil Agreement, I think, is that it gives us a clear, data-driven reason for why our politics feels so angry and personal and intractable. It confirms that the roots of today's conflict are deep. They're psychological, rooted in group identity, not just legislative platforms.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to explore. If our disagreements are less about what the government should do, less about policy details, and overwhelmingly more about who we are as people and which group gets to be on top, how can any traditional policy-based negotiation actually succeed? It really forces you to rethink the whole nature of political compromise.
This book is just essential for understanding our current political moment. Keep thinking rationally. The next time you see a policy debate, just ask yourself, is this disagreement about the merits of the law, or is it just the mega-identity talking?
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique. Then, if you found this helpful, subscribe, share, consider purchasing the book via the provided link, and keep thinking rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.